I was 63 years old when my son first called me crazy to my face. Not in anger, not in a passing argument where words spill faster than reason. No. He said it with the calmness of someone who had already made up his mind, with the assurance of someone who knew others would believe him over me. "Mom," he said, his voice steady but distant, "you need help. People are starting to notice." People. Which people? I wanted to ask. But the lump in my throat kept me silent. For so long I had been careful with my words, careful not to cause waves, careful to keep the fragile fabric of our family intact, even when it was already tearing apart. And now, my only son, my Daniel, was holding the scissors in his hand. At first, I thought he meant it as concern, that maybe, just maybe, this was his clumsy way of saying he saw my pain, that he understood the sleepless nights, the years of endurance, the bruises I had covered with long sleeves, the meals I skipped so he could eat. But then he told the neighbors, he told the pastor, he told his friends, he told my own sister. "My mother's not well," he whispered, like a confession that made him look noble. "She imagines things. She's paranoid." And they believed him, because who would believe a woman like me, a widow, poor, shoulders bent with the weight of 60 years of storms, a woman who had lived too long in silence, who had never fought back when her husband's fists taught her body the language of pain, a woman who had carried her shame like a second skin. I wasn't crazy. I was tired, but tired women are easy to dismiss. I remember the first time I felt the shift. It was subtle. At church, after service, people no longer lingered when I approached. They smiled too quickly, too politely, and excused themselves. My sister stopped calling, except to check if I had taken my medication, a medication I had never been prescribed. Even the grocer looked at me differently, sliding the receipt across the counter like he was afraid to brush my hand. It was as though my son had handed me a mask I never asked for. And now everyone saw only that mask. Crazy. Do you know what it feels like to have your own child erase you? To watch him take your truth, twist it, and set it aflame for the world to warm themselves by, while you freeze in the ashes. You learn to doubt the sound of your own voice. Daniel wasn't always this way. Once, he was the boy who clung to my skirts, who cried if I left him alone too long, who begged me to sing him the old lullabies when thunder rattled our house. When his father raged, Daniel would hide behind me, his small body trembling, and I would shield him as best I could. I thought I was teaching him strength, but children don't always learn what we intend. Sometimes they learn that power belongs to the loudest voice, the heaviest hand. His father died when Daniel was 17, a heart attack, sudden and brutal, leaving him sprawled across the living room floor. I should have felt sorrow, but all I felt was air rushing back into my lungs, like I'd been holding my breath for 2 decades. I thought Daniel felt it too, that we could finally breathe together. But freedom is not the same for everyone. For me, it was survival. For him, it was resentment. "You let him treat us like that," he said once, bitterness dripping from his tongue. "You never fought back." How could I explain that fighting back meant worse bruises, longer nights, a son growing up without a mother at all? He didn't want explanations. He wanted someone to blame. And so I became the villain in his story. The first time he told me I was losing it, I laughed. a bitter, cracked laugh, but a laugh nonetheless. I thought he was teasing, trying to win an argument about bills or chores. But then came the looks, the whispers, the way he'd sigh when I mentioned things that mattered to me. "Mom, you're remembering wrong. Mom, that never happened. Mom, you're making things up again." And slowly, the people around us began to nod in agreement with him. They nodded because it was easier to believe him than to believe me, because the truth I carried was heavier than they wanted to lift. But I remembered everything: the bruises, the hunger, the nights I prayed with my hands pressed to my mouth so my husband wouldn't hear. I remembered the sacrifices, the jobs I worked, the meals I skipped. I remembered the way Daniel clung to me when he was small. And I remembered how, the night his father died, he didn't cry. He just stared at me, eyes dark and hollow, as though he already knew he would never forgive me for surviving. You see, that's the cruelest part. People think madness is loud, chaotic, impossible to miss. But the kind of madness my son accused me of, it was invisible, a shadow painted onto my back by his words. "Your mom's a bit unstable," he'd say, with a sympathetic shake of his head. "I try to take care of her, but it's not easy." And with those words he made himself the hero, the dutiful son, burdened with an aging, broken mother. Everyone praised him. Everyone pitied him. No one pitied me. I was alone, standing on the edge of a cliff I hadn't chosen, wondering if I should jump just to prove them right. But I didn't, because somewhere deep inside, buried beneath the exhaustion and the silence, I still had a weapon left: the truth. And if patience was the only thing I had mastered in my 63 years of surviving men who tried to break me, then patience would be the blade I kept hidden until the day I needed to cut through the lies. That day was coming. The day Daniel told the neighbors I was hearing voices was the day I realized how far he was willing to go. I had simply mentioned while watering the small patch of garden behind our house that I sometimes talked to his late father when I felt lonely. Not in a supernatural way, just in the quiet muttering we widows sometimes allow ourselves, a whisper into the air, a memory made audible. But Daniel twisted it. "Mom thinks Dad's still alive," he said, half joking, half serious, his voice carrying over the fence to Mrs. Parker, who happened to be hanging laundry in her yard. "She talks to him all the time, like full conversations." Mrs. Parker gasped and pressed a hand to her chest. She smiled at me afterward, a strained, pitiful smile, the kind reserved for children or invalids. And that was that. The rumor grew legs, and before long, I was the woman who spoke to ghosts. I wanted to scream, to demand that Daniel stop, to shake him until he saw the cruelty of what he was doing. But I didn't, because raising my voice had never saved me before. Silence had always been my shield, and I clung to it still. Besides, what good would shouting do when no one believed me? It wasn't always this way between us. When Daniel was a boy, he used to tell me everything. He would sit at the kitchen table, swinging his little legs, recounting his day at school, every triumph, every insult. He'd tell me about his dreams of becoming a doctor, of buying me a house with no broken windows and no yelling. He said he would protect me someday, that he'd never let anyone hurt me again. But children grow up, and promises, like milk left out overnight, sour with time. Now, at 39, Daniel had turned into a man whose words no longer comforted. They cut. And yet, there was a softness in him that he reserved for others. For strangers, he was charming, helpful, quick to smile. People adored him. They called him generous, selfless. They said I was lucky to have a son who looked after me. But behind closed doors, his kindness curdled. He didn't shout like his father used to. No, Daniel's weapon was subtler. He chipped away at me with words, with little sighs of exasperation, with stories whispered to others that left me defenseless. When I misplaced my glasses, he told everyone I was slipping. When I forgot to pay the water bill on time, he laughed and said I was losing track of reality. When I told him I had heard a strange noise outside one night, he smirked and asked, "Was it the voices again, Mom?" It was death by 1,000 cuts. And the worst part, people clapped for him while he did it. "Oh, Daniel, you're such a good son," the pastor's wife told him once. "It's not easy, dealing with a mother like that, like me." I began to doubt myself. At night, when I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, I replayed every word, every memory, trying to test its truth. Did I really say that? Did I really forget so often? Was I, in fact, losing my mind and too far gone to notice? But then I would recall the bruises, the nights hiding in the bathroom with a towel under the door so the smell of liquor wouldn't seep in, the mornings when I patched Daniel's scraped knees and told him lies about his father being tired or stressed, just so he wouldn't hate the man he came from. I remembered it all too clearly, and sanity, I realized, is often a matter of endurance. The insane cannot wait. They unravel. I had been waiting, enduring, surviving for 63 long years. That was not madness. That was strength. One evening after supper, Daniel leaned across the table, his eyes gleaming with something I didn't yet understand. "You know, Mom," he said, almost casually, "people listen to me. They trust me. If I wanted to, I could have you placed somewhere, a home, somewhere safe." Safe. That word rolled off his tongue like poison coated in honey. I set down my fork, hands trembling beneath the table. He was threatening me, not openly, but enough. He wanted me afraid. He wanted me compliant. And for a moment, I was. My heart raced, my palms damp. The image of being locked away in some cold institution, stripped of my voice, my truth, my freedom, it haunted me. But then something shifted inside me. Not by burying him in the ground, but by burying his lies in the truth. And the truth, my dear, is eternal. Perhaps it was the years of silence, the decades of swallowing pain, finally pressing back against my ribs, demanding release. I looked him in the eye and said nothing, because silence, when wielded carefully, is not weakness. It is a weapon. I began to watch him, not obviously, not in ways that would feed his narrative of me being paranoid. But I noticed things. The way he locked his phone screen when I walked by. The way he spoke softly into it at night, as though making secret arrangements. The way envelopes arrived with his name on them, official looking, which he hid in a drawer before I could glimpse their contents. Something was happening, something more than his campaign to make me look unwell. And in that realization, I found a flicker of purpose, because if he was going to paint me as mad, then I would use every ounce of patience, every scar that had taught me endurance to bide my time, to gather the truth piece by piece, until the day I could place it in the open, undeniable, unshakable. The day I would prove my sanity, not with protests, not with pleas, but with the sharp, clean blade of evidence. Daniel thought he was winning. He thought he was the puppeteer, pulling my strings, dancing me toward the edge of ruin. But he had forgotten one thing. I had already survived worse men than him. And when the time came, I would show him that the woman he called crazy was the same woman who had endured beatings, starvation, humiliation, and still stood. I would show him the truth. And the truth, once revealed, is a kind of vengeance no lie can withstand. I often wondered what Daniel saw when he looked at me. Did he see the mother who patched up his scraped elbows and held his trembling hand when thunder cracked the sky? Or did he see only an old woman with thinning hair, stiff joints, and a voice he could twist into madness? Sometimes I thought he saw nothing at all, nothing but a nuisance he needed to manage. It was late autumn when I realized just how far he intended to push his performance. The leaves had turned to brittle fire outside, the air sharp with the scent of wood smoke. Our house, my house, though Daniel never called it that anymore, creaked with the season's chill. I was boiling tea when he walked in, shoulders squared, face carefully composed. "Mom," he began, tone smooth, rehearsed, "we need to talk about your finances." My finances, the money I had scraped together from years of sewing clothes, cleaning houses, working night shifts when Daniel was a boy, and I was young enough to believe exhaustion was something you could outpace. It wasn't much, but it was mine. He leaned against the counter, arms folded. "It's getting hard for you to keep up, isn't it? Bills, groceries, prescriptions. You get confused. I see it all the time. And I've been thinking, maybe it's best if I take over, just to make sure everything is handled." My stomach tightened. His eyes didn't waver. He had already decided. "You want access to my bank account," I said. My voice was quiet, even, though inside my ribs, my heart hammered like a trapped bird. He gave me a thin smile. "It's not about what I want. It's about keeping you safe. You don't want to lose the house, do you? Forget to pay something important." It was a threat, cloaked as concern, and I knew if I handed him the reins, he would drive me straight into ruin. He didn't want to take care of me. He wanted to take everything. I didn't answer him right away. Instead, I poured the tea, steadying my hand as best I could, and placed one cup in front of him. He didn't drink it. He only watched me, waiting for submission. But I'd lived too long under another man's rule to mistake compliance for survival. I nodded as though I agreed. "We'll see," I murmured. "We'll talk more about it soon." And I saw the flicker of triumph in his eyes, the flicker that told me he thought he had won. But patience, as always, was my armor. After that, I began to keep records, quietly, meticulously, receipts tucked into a small tin beneath my mattress, notes written in tiny script, marking dates, times, the exact words he used when he thought I wasn't paying attention. I even borrowed an old tape recorder from the church basement. No one asked why, and learned to keep it tucked in my apron pocket. If he wanted to play at lies, then I would gather truth piece by piece like stones to build a fortress. Around that time, my sister stopped visiting altogether. She said it was because she was busy, because her grandkids needed her, because the drive was too long. But I knew the real reason. Daniel had gotten to her too. "Be careful with Mom," he told her over the phone, not realizing I was in the next room. "She's slipping. Sometimes she doesn't make sense. I just don't want her to embarrass herself." Embarrass herself. My own sister believed him. When I called, her voice was tight, careful, as though she were speaking to a child who might burst into tears at any moment. It cut me deeper than I expected. You spend a lifetime building bonds, and yet one whisper can unravel them. One evening, I overheard Daniel on the phone in his room. His voice was low, urgent. I crept down the hallway, soft as dust, and caught fragments through the thin door. "Yeah, she doesn't suspect a thing. Once it's under my name, I'll be able to—" No, it won't be long." My blood turned to ice. Under his name, my house, my account, my life. I backed away before he could catch me listening. But in that moment, I understood. This wasn't just about reputation anymore. He wasn't satisfied with making me look unstable. He wanted control, full control, the kind of control his father once had, but painted over with a veneer of respectability. The good son, sacrificing his freedom to care for his poor, demented mother. That's the story he was writing. And the ending, I realized, was me stripped of everything. Home, dignity, truth. But he had made a mistake. He assumed the years had broken me. He assumed endurance meant weakness. He had no idea that endurance, sharpened over decades, becomes something else entirely. It becomes steel. The next Sunday at church, I sat alone in the back pew. People gave me those pitying smiles again, the ones Daniel had trained them to give. But while the pastor droned on, my gaze swept the room. These people, all of them, thought they knew who I was. They thought I was fragile, unstable, a shadow of a woman, and I thought, one day I will show you. That thought warmed me more than any sermon could. Daniel grew bolder in the weeks that followed. He began bringing up the home again. How nice it would be for me to live somewhere with nurses, where I wouldn't have to worry about bills or chores. He spoke as if it were mercy, but I saw the greed beneath his words. He wanted this house, this land, whatever scraps of savings I had left. One night, he even left brochures on the kitchen table. Smiling faces of elderly people in wheelchairs, colorful gardens, sterile rooms. I stared at those pictures until my eyes blurred. He had already planned it, already chosen the cage he meant to lock me in. But what he didn't know was that his words, his schemes, his whispers, they were all fuel, and I was gathering the firewood, stacking it neatly, waiting for the moment to strike the match. The turning point came on a cold December evening. The wind howled through the cracks in the windows, rattling the house like bones. Daniel was in the living room, speaking on the phone again. This time, he left the door cracked. "Yeah, once she's declared incompetent, it'll be easy. I'll have power of attorney. Everything will transfer." Declared incompetent. My knees nearly gave out beneath me. He wasn't just trying to shame me. He wanted to erase me, to legally strip me of existence, to turn me into a ghost, while my body still breathed. I pressed a hand to my chest, forcing air into my lungs. And in that terrible moment, a strange calm washed over me, because finally I understood the full scope of his betrayal. And with understanding came clarity. If he wanted war, then I would give him one. Not with fists, not with rage, not with the kind of violence that had once silenced me, but with patience, precision, and truth. The kind of revenge no one could lock away. From that night on, I was no longer merely surviving. I was preparing. I used to believe that truth alone was enough, that if you carried it inside you, if you held it steady, people would see it shining through your skin. But 63 years of endurance had taught me otherwise. Truth does not reveal itself. It must be dragged into the light, kicking and screaming, or it will remain buried under the weight of lies. So I began to dig. It started small. Each time Daniel made a comment, each time he shook his head at me in front of others, each time he smirked when I misplaced something, I wrote it down. Date, time, exact words. I had pages by the end of the first week. By the end of the second, I had a notebook. I hid it in a place Daniel never looked, the hollow space beneath the floorboard in my bedroom closet. Years ago, when his father raged through the house, I had created that hiding spot for things I couldn't afford to lose. A jar of coins, a letter from my own mother, photographs with the corners bent. Now the notebook joined them, the ink still fresh, the truth still fragile. But truth written is not enough. I needed voices, evidence no one could deny. That's where the old tape recorder came in. I carried it in my apron pocket when I cooked, when I sat in the living room with Daniel, when I folded laundry as he made his sly remarks. Sometimes I left it on the counter, hidden beneath a newspaper, its red light blinking faintly. At first, I was clumsy. My hands shook. I feared he would catch me. But the more I did it, the steadier I became. And slowly, my tin box of evidence began to fill. It was around this time that Daniel grew louder with his threats. One evening, as we ate dinner, he set his fork down with a clatter and looked at me with something close to pity. "Mom," he said, "you can't live like this much longer. You forget too much. You wander around the house at night. The other day, you left the stove on." "I didn't," I said evenly. He smirked. "You just don't remember." And then, leaning closer, "I've already spoken to someone about guardianship, about making sure you're taken care of." The words hung between us like smoke. Guardianship. He had set the wheels in motion. I excused myself to the kitchen, pretending to tidy the dishes. My hands trembled as I rinsed them, but inside my mind was sharp, alert. He thought I was crumbling. He thought his story was airtight, but he didn't know I had his words recorded, didn't know that I had him speaking, clear as day, about guardianship, about power of attorney, about making sure I couldn't stand in his way. It was his arrogance that betrayed him. He believed me too feeble to fight, and that arrogance would be his undoing. The weeks that followed tested me more than I could have imagined. Daniel began inviting people over, friends, colleagues, the pastor. He paraded me in front of them, like a trophy of his supposed sacrifice. "She forgets things sometimes," he'd say with a sympathetic shrug. "She gets confused, but I do my best." They would look at me with soft, condescending smiles, nodding as though they understood. I wanted to scream. I wanted to rip the mask from his face and shout the truth into their ears until they could no longer deny it. But instead, I smiled. I offered them tea. I played the part of the docile, fragile mother, because every performance needs an audience, and when the curtain finally fell, they would see the truth for themselves. At night, I could hear Daniel making plans on the phone. "Once she's in the home, I'll have access. No, she won't fight it. She can't. By spring, everything will be settled." By spring, that gave me a timeline. 3 months. 3 months to gather enough to prepare carefully, to ensure that when the moment came, his lies would collapse under the weight of his own words. I became more observant than I had ever been in my life. Every phone call, every envelope, every careless slip of his tongue, I captured it all. My tin beneath the floorboard grew heavier. Each piece of evidence, another brick in the wall I was building around myself. But truth is not only about proof, it is also about patience. And patience had been carved into my bones long ago. Still, there were nights when doubt crept in. Alone in my bed, staring at the cracked ceiling, I wondered if I was strong enough, if, in the end, Daniel's voice would drown mine, just as his father's once had. I remembered those nights of fists and silence, the way I had bitten my lip until it bled just to keep from crying out. I had survived by being quiet, by enduring. But this time was different. This time, silence was not survival. It was strategy. And when I closed my eyes, I saw Daniel's face the night he told me people would believe him over me. That smug certainty, that cruel confidence, it was that image that steadied me, that image that reminded me this was no longer just about me. This was about every woman who had been silenced, every mother dismissed, every truth buried. If I could endure one more storm, then I could finally turn the tide. The first real crack in Daniel's mask appeared in January. We were at the grocery store. I had insisted on coming with him, though he preferred to go alone. As we walked the aisles, I noticed him slip a bottle of liquor into his coat pocket, quietly, smoothly, the way his father once had. But the cashier saw, and though Daniel smoothed it over with charm and excuses, I saw something flicker in her eyes, doubt. That was when I knew the world could believe his lies only as long as his mask held, and masks, no matter how carefully painted, always crack. All I had to do was wait, and I had been waiting my whole life. By February, I was ready. My notebook was full, my recordings were clear, my evidence was undeniable. Daniel had no idea. He still smirked, still whispered, still made plans, as though he were invincible. But beneath the floorboard in my closet lay the truth, my truth. And soon it would rise like a storm he could not escape. February dragged itself across the calendar like a wounded animal, but Daniel moved with purpose. He had grown bolder, more confident. He spoke freely about the future, his words sharp with certainty. "You'll thank me one day, Mom," he said as we sat at the kitchen table. The window rattled with winter wind, and the bare trees scraped their branches against the glass. "Once you're settled in a place where people understand how to take care of you, you'll see. It's better for everyone." I stared at him across the table. His face, so much like his father's in the cruel set of his jaw, seemed unfamiliar, and yet too familiar all at once. "You're my son," I whispered. "Why would you do this to me?" His lips curled in a half smile, but his eyes were cold. "Because someone has to." It wasn't concern. It wasn't love. It was control. Not long after that, I began receiving letters, official ones, thick envelopes with seals I didn't recognize. Daniel would collect them before I could read them, tucking them into his jacket with a dismissive, "Just more bills, Mom, don't worry." But worry is all I did. When he left the house one afternoon, I searched his room. My hands trembled as I opened drawers, lifted stacks of papers, sorted through his desk. I found them in a manila folder, neatly arranged. Legal documents, petitions, words like guardianship, incompetence, power of attorney, my name written across them like a curse. I sat on the edge of his bed, the folder heavy in my lap, my breath shallow. He had been preparing it for weeks, maybe months, and soon he would take me to court, parade me in front of strangers, and convince them I was insane. He thought I would walk into that room defenseless, but I had my own folder hidden beneath the floorboard, a folder filled with the truth. I redoubled my efforts. Each day became a performance. I let him think I was frail, that I was confused, that I was slipping further away. I let him believe his story. But at night, when the house was silent, I gathered my evidence. I listened to the tapes, rewound them, labeled them carefully. I reviewed my notes, my dates, my words etched in ink that could not be erased. I rehearsed in my mind what I would say, how I would say it, when the time came, and the more I prepared, the stronger I felt. Still, the weight of betrayal pressed down on me. Sometimes I would catch myself staring at Daniel as he ate dinner, wondering how the little boy who once begged me to sing him lullabies could have grown into this man. I remembered the way he used to slip his small hand into mine, the way he used to cry when I left the room. I remembered how he once swore he'd protect me, and now he was the one I needed protection from. That truth cut me deeper than any bruise his father had left on my skin. The first sign that Daniel suspected something came one icy morning in late February. I was in the kitchen, humming softly to myself as I folded laundry. The recorder was hidden beneath a stack of towels, capturing every word. "Mom," Daniel said suddenly, his eyes narrowing, "why do you keep writing things down?" My heart skipped. I glanced at the notebook on the counter, open to a page of careful notes. For a moment, I thought he might grab it, tear it apart. But I smiled, forcing my voice steady. My memory isn't what it used to be. Writing helps me remember. He studied me for a long moment, then smirked. "See? Even you admit it." He thought he had caught me, but all he had caught was the mask I had chosen to show him. When he left the room, I closed the notebook and slipped it into my apron. My hands shook, but my resolve was unshaken. If anything, his suspicion only confirmed what I already knew. The time was drawing near. By March, the house felt less like a home and more like a waiting room before a storm. Daniel grew impatient. He muttered about court dates, about paperwork, about how soon everything will be settled. He snapped at me more often, his mask of kindness slipping when he thought no one was watching. And yet, when the neighbors stopped by, he was all charm again, the good son, the devoted caretaker, the man burdened with a fragile mother. It made me sick to watch, but I let him play his part. Because every performance, every slip, every word was being documented. And one day his mask would shatter under the weight of the truth. The night before everything began to unravel, I dreamt of my husband. Not the monster he became, but the man he was before the drink, before the rage. He stood at the foot of my bed, his face half in shadow, his voice soft. "You endured me," he said. "Now endure him, but don't just endure, win." I woke with tears on my cheeks, my fists clenched tight, and I knew this was not just survival anymore. This was justice. The next morning, Daniel made an announcement. "Mom, we've got a meeting," he said, his tone smug, triumphant. "With the lawyer. It's just a formality, nothing to worry about." But I saw the gleam in his eyes. This was it, the beginning of the end, at least in his mind. What he didn't realize was that I was ready, more ready than I had ever been for anything in my life, because I wasn't walking into that meeting as a broken woman. I was walking in with a weapon, the truth. And Daniel was about to learn that the mother he called crazy had been silently building a storm that would wash his lies away. The morning of the meeting dawned gray, the kind of sky that promised rain but held it back, heavy and swollen. My bones ached with the weight of it. I sat at the kitchen table in my best coat, the one I had saved for funerals and church holidays. My hands were folded, steady despite the storm rising inside me. Daniel strutted in, tie crooked, hair slicked back as if he were preparing for a performance. And in a way, he was. This was his stage. He had rehearsed his lines for months, whispered them into phones, practiced them on neighbors, polished them until they gleamed with false sincerity. "Ready, Mom?" he asked, his voice dripping with that false sweetness that others mistook for kindness. I nodded. "I'm ready." He thought he was leading me to my ruin. What he didn't know was that I had packed my handbag with everything I needed, the recorder, copies of my notes, a few photographs, even one of the letters he had tried to hide. The truth was heavy, but it fit neatly in my bag like a weapon sharpened in secret. The lawyer's office was cold, lined with shelves of thick books that smelled of dust and authority. Daniel spoke with practiced charm, shaking hands, smiling, easing into the role of the devoted son burdened by his mother's decline. "Thank you for seeing us," he said smoothly. "I've been so worried. My mother isn't, well, she forgets things. She imagines things. I just want to make sure she's cared for properly." The lawyer turned to me, his eyes cautious, polite. "Mrs. Walker, is that true? Do you feel you're unable to manage on your own?" I looked at Daniel. His smirk was small, almost invisible, but I knew it was there. He expected me to stumble, to falter, to confirm his story with my own confusion, but instead I reached into my handbag. "No," I said clearly, "that isn't true, and I have proof." The next few minutes moved slowly, each second a drop of water falling into a still pond. I placed the first tape recorder on the desk, pressed play. Daniel's voice filled the room, unmistakable, undeniable. "Once she's declared incompetent, it'll be easy. I'll have power of attorney. Everything will transfer." His face drained of color. He lunged forward, trying to stop it, but I was quicker. "Sit down," I said, my voice like iron. For the first time in years, he obeyed me. I pulled out the notebook, thick with dates and words. I slid it across the desk, page after page of careful records. His gaslighting, his threats, his plans. The lawyer adjusted his glasses, flipping through the entries, his expression hardening with each line. And finally, I pulled out the letter, his petition for guardianship, the one with my name written across it like a death sentence. "He hid this from me," I said. My voice did not shake. "He has been trying to erase me, to take everything I built, everything I survived, and claim it as his own." The room was silent, but for the sound of the tape still playing, Daniel's voice sealing his own fate. "Mom?" he started, his voice frantic now, the mask slipping. "You don't understand." I turned to him, and for the first time in decades, I saw him clearly. Not as the boy who once clung to me, not as the man who smiled for others, but as what he truly was, a coward who thought lies were stronger than the woman who had raised him. "No, Daniel," I said softly, but with a strength that filled the room. "You don't understand. You thought I was weak because I was quiet. But I was quiet because I was waiting for the day you gave me enough rope to hang your lies with." His mouth opened, closed, but no words came. The lawyer cleared his throat. "Mr. Walker, this is very serious. What your mother has presented, it changes everything." I leaned back in my chair, folding my hands in my lap. For the first time in years, I felt taller than my son. The meeting ended with Daniel storming out, his face red, his charm shattered. The lawyer promised to review everything carefully to make sure no false claims could move forward. But I didn't need his promises. I had already won, because Daniel could no longer whisper his lies unchecked. His words, his plans, his cruelty, they were all carved into tape and paper, undeniable, unshakable. And I knew he would try again. Men like him always do. But the difference now was that I had pulled the mask from his face. He could never wear it so convincingly again. That night, I sat in my kitchen with a cup of tea, listening to the wind against the windows. The house was quiet, and I smiled, because I had proven my sanity, not by begging, not by screaming, not by fighting with fists, but by showing the truth, and the truth was the sweetest revenge of all. But the story wasn't finished, because Daniel, humiliated and exposed, wasn't done with me yet, and neither was I with him. I thought perhaps he would disappear after that day in the lawyer's office. That shame might finally silence him, but I should have known better. Daniel had always thrived on an audience, and when one stage collapsed beneath him, he went searching for another. It began with whispers again, only this time louder, more desperate. He went to the neighbors, the church, even the local paper. He spun his story tighter than ever. His poor mother, slipping into madness, refusing help, lashing out with wild accusations. He said I had tricked the lawyer, that I had forged things, that I had turned cruel in my old age. He wanted the world to pity him and to despise me. At first I feared it might work. Neighbors looked at me with guarded eyes. The woman from across the street stopped bringing me soup. Even at the grocery store, whispers floated just out of reach. Crazy, dangerous, unfit. It hurt, I won't lie. The sting of betrayal had become a constant companion in my old age, but still, when the community you've given your life to turns its face away, it cuts deep. But the difference now was this. I was no longer silent. I called the lawyer. I asked for copies of everything, recordings, transcripts, my notes. I even asked if there was a way to protect myself legally from further slander. And then I went further. I began to speak. At the quilting circle where I had been absent too long, I brought my notebook and read aloud from it. Page after page of Daniel's threats, his manipulations, his schemes. The women gasped. Some even cried, for they had sons of their own. At church, when Daniel strutted in and painted himself the martyr, I stood up from my pew. My voice trembled at first, but then it grew. Carried by years of silence, breaking all at once, I told them the truth. I didn't beg them to believe me. I showed them the letter, the recording, the evidence Daniel had assumed would never see daylight. And oh, the look on his face. That mask of charm cracking right there in front of the altar. He hissed at me like a cornered snake, but the congregation stared at him differently now. Suspicion had shifted. The pity he craved was slipping through his fingers like sand. But Daniel wasn't finished. One Sunday evening he called a family meeting. My cousins, his wife, even some neighbors were there. He wanted an audience, a tribunal where he could corner me and bury me once and for all. He paced the living room like a preacher, waving his arms, spinning his lies bigger and brighter. She's delusional, he declared. She's dangerous. She's destroying this family with her paranoia. Some of them nodded nervously. Some avoided my eyes. He thought he had them. I waited, patient, quiet, the way I had always been, until he turned to me with triumph in his eyes and spat. Tell them, Mom. Tell them you don't remember what you've done. Tell them you need help. I stood slowly. My joints ached, but my voice was strong. No, I said, I'll tell them what you've done. And I set my handbag on the coffee table. One by one, I laid the truth before them. The letters, the tapes, the records, his own words, preserved against his arrogance. The room was silent, but for his voice spilling out of that recorder once again. Once she's declared incompetent, it'll be easy. I'll have power of attorney. Everything will transfer. I watched faces shift. Doubt, shock, disgust. The cousins he thought would side with him shifted away from his chair. His wife's face turned pale, her hands twisting in her lap. Daniel lunged at the recorder, but this time, someone else stopped him. My cousin Samuel, a big man with no patience for liars, put a firm hand on his shoulder and shoved him back down. You said all that? Samuel asked, staring at Daniel. Daniel stammered. He sweated. He tried to twist the words, but the spell was broken. His voice could not be unspoken. I looked at them all and said, I may be old. I may move slower, forget names, leave the stove on once in a while, but don't mistake that for madness. What's truly mad is a man who would destroy his own mother for money. And that, my friends, is what my son has done. The silence was thick. The weight of the truth pressed down on the room, and I could feel it, his empire of lies crumbling beneath him, brick by brick, in the very place he thought he would bury me. Daniel's wife stood. Her face was white, her lips trembling. She didn't say a word. She simply walked out. Daniel called after her, but his voice was shrill now, desperate, stripped of all its shine. Nobody followed him when he stormed out after her. They stayed with me instead. That night, as the last guests left, Samuel lingered by the door. "You've got grit, Aunt Margaret," he said. "Most people would have folded, but you burned him with his own fire." I smiled, tired but satisfied, because that was the revenge he never expected. Not violence, not screaming, not bitterness, just the simple, relentless exposure of the truth. The truth he thought I was too weak, too broken, too crazy to ever hold on to. And yet, deep in my chest, I knew it wasn't over. Daniel was humiliated, his lies shredded, his mask torn apart. But humiliation is a dangerous thing in the wrong hands, and I could see it in his eyes as he stormed away that night. A vow, a promise. He would try again, and I would be ready. Because I had learned something through all of this. Patience is not weakness. Silence is not surrender. And when the time came, I would end his lies forever. Not with my fists, not with poison or fire, but with the one thing he never could destroy, the truth. After that night, Daniel vanished from my doorstep. He stopped calling, stopped parading through my neighborhood with his poisoned words. For a while there was silence, and I wondered if perhaps the battle had ended, but I should have known better. A man like Daniel doesn't retreat. He reloads. It came in the form of a letter in the mail, official, crisp, another hearing, this time in front of a judge. He was trying again, only louder, only bolder. He had claimed I was dangerous to myself and others, that I had a history of violent delusions. He even listed names of neighbors who would testify against me. Lies upon lies built into a towering wall meant to crush me once and for all. I sat at the table with the letter in my trembling hands. My first thought was exhaustion. My second thought was fury. And then came resolve. I had beaten him before in living rooms and churches. But now, if he wanted a stage, I would give him one. I would drag his lies into the brightest light there was, a courtroom. The day of the hearing, I wore my best coat again. This time, I wasn't just defending myself. I was finishing the fight. Daniel arrived with his lawyer, smug as ever, as though the months of humiliation had been erased. He smirked at me across the aisle, certain he would finally triumph. The judge called the room to order. Daniel spoke first, dripping poison with every word. He painted me as unstable, paranoid, a danger. He spoke of imaginary threats, of hallucinations. He even had the audacity to say, "It breaks my heart, but I can't stand by while my mother destroys herself." Some people in the room looked at me with pity. Others looked with doubt. I could feel the tide turning against me, the way it always had before. Daniel was a master of performance. But this time, I had rehearsed too. When it was my turn, I stood slowly. I placed my handbag on the witness stand and looked Daniel in the eyes. "You've told them I'm mad," I said, "but let's hear your own words, shall we?" I pressed play on the recorder. His voice filled the courtroom. "Once she's declared incompetent, it'll be easy. I'll have power of attorney. Everything will transfer." The murmurs rippled through the room. I showed the judge my notebook, page after page of careful dated records, his visits, his threats, his manipulations. I handed over copies of his letters, the ones he never thought I would see. And then I called my witnesses. One by one, people I had shown the truth to stepped forward. Women from church, my cousin Samuel, even Daniel's own wife, pale but resolute. They each told the judge what they had heard, what they had seen, what they had read in his own handwriting. With each testimony, Daniel shrank smaller in his chair. The charm slipped. The performance faltered. By the time it was over, he was no longer the golden son fighting for his poor mother. He was a liar caught in his own net. The judge's ruling was swift. Petition denied. And I will advise, Mr. Walker, that any further attempts of this nature may result in charges of fraud. The gavel struck. Just like that, it was done. But for me, the real victory wasn't the ruling. It was the look on Daniel's face as he realized the truth had outpaced every lie he'd ever spun. He stormed out of the courtroom without looking back. Some part of me knew I would never see him again, not as a son, not as a neighbor, not even as an enemy. His shame had driven him into hiding, and I didn't chase him, because in that moment I understood. Revenge doesn't always look like fire or blood. Sometimes it looks like silence. Sometimes it looks like peace. And sometimes it looks like a woman the world thought was broken, standing tall in a courtroom with nothing but the truth in her hands. Now, when I walk through town, people look at me differently, not with pity, not with doubt, but with respect, some even with awe. They whisper, "That's the woman who stood up to her own son, who proved the truth." And when I sit alone at night in the quiet of my kitchen, I feel a calm I haven't known in years. Daniel may still whisper somewhere in the dark, but it no longer matters. His words are dust now. Because I proved my sanity, I proved my strength, and I proved that lies can only live in the shadows. I dragged them into the light, and in the light they burned. That is how I outlived him.